Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in System Center technologies. Today's discussion will be part 7 in a series that we're doing discussing application deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. Today's discussion takes us back onto the server side where we were in session 6, looking at some behind the scenes type of detail that happens whenever we build. In today's session anyway, applications. So in session 6, the session just before this one, we talked about behind the scenes details for packages. Today the focus is on applications. The next behind the scenes session on the server side will focus on distribution points and the structure of distribution points, how information is stored there, how information is sent there, that kind of thing. So today we're gonna take an application and build it and show that in the console very quickly, but then look behind the scenes and see how that application is actually defined, described in the database, in WMI as well, to some extent. I want to show you WMI, and so on. So some of the components that will be at play will be the same components that were in play in the previous session. But there are some new ones. So familiar things should be the SMS executive. The database, as a general term, we looked at in the previous presentation, part 6. We're going to look back at the database. We're going to see some different things today that are specific to application deployment. We certainly talked a little bit about WMI in the last session. I want to pull the covers back even a little bit more on WMI today and show you what happens whenever the admin UI is used to configure an application, and then ultimately kind of how that's reflected in WMI through the SMS provider. I won't go off in the weeds on that too much because there's so much information in WMI that could be a session or two on its own or more. And then we'll certainly take a look at some of the unique tables and so on for applications in the database. So in WMI, again, we'll take a look at a particular namespace. We'll look for sure in the database at the various CI tables. Again, there's a lot here. So just understand, as I go through this, I'm not trying to go end to end every single piece of what's going on behind the scenes, but give you enough to understand kind of the process that happens, and maybe whet your appetite to look further if you're interested in this kind of thing. One disclaimer as we start through this discussion always is this: the database is a place that's very sensitive, and so making changes directly in the database or directly in WMI for that matter is not a good thing. It's not supported. You have to be very careful if you're going to do that. Certainly there are places and times where that is necessary in troubleshooting issues. In those cases, you need to be working with someone directly in the Microsoft support team so that we can help you. Making a mistake here can be a bad thing. So take the approach, look, don't touch. Use this for education. That's why I do it, and go from there. The other reason today's discussion is important: when we get to the client side, understanding some of the things, some of the concepts I'm going to present in the discussion today are going to be pretty important to familiarize yourself with some troubleshooting stuff we'll do on the client side. Familiarize in terms of understanding what some of the objects that are referenced in the logs and on the client and so on, what they actually are. All right. So we'll do that again to help kind of see the process end to end. So other components, some of them again familiar. SQL replication. We're not going to go into detail on that. Again, we already talked about the fact that there's two types of data in Configuration Manager. One type of data is known as metadata. Another type is content data. There are two different replication mechanisms now in 2012 to accommodate moving that data from site to site. SQL replication is one, site-to-site communications another. Both of those will strongly play in application deployment, just like it did in package deployment. We talked about it a little bit in package deployment, so we won't belabor the issue here. Here are some of the familiar components. So certainly we talked about SMS Database Monitor last time. We talked about Distribution Manager a bit last time. Couple of new ones that are unique for application deployment: Hierarchy Manager we didn't talk about last time, and Object Replication Manager we didn't talk about last time. All right, so we'll see those different pieces at play too. These pieces, as we talked about last time, are for site-to-site communication. I won't belabor the point today. Talked about them a little bit, showed them a little bit in the last session, and there will be a session coming up that focuses on site-to-site communication. So we'll save further discussion till then. Then there's a term that we haven't talked about yet called CI. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what a CI actually is. All right. So a CI stands for configuration item. Configuration item is a very important component for application deployment. CIs are a concept that were first introduced in Configuration Manager 2007. And they were introduced by a component known as DCM, Desired Configuration Monitoring Management. There are other components, though, that make use of CIs, such as software updates. Okay, so a CI, basically, if you define it, is a unit of configuration. Not to be funny, but a CI uniquely describes some sort of configuration that needs to be evaluated, take place on a client. So for DCM, Desired Configuration Monitoring, now compliance settings in 2012, we have the ability to define a setting in the registry, on a file, wherever, WMI, that we want to evaluate, validate, and then in some scenarios maybe set back to a certain value if it's not that value already. The mechanism for doing that is this configuration item structure. All right, configuration items describe the setting that we want to evaluate, how we want to evaluate, what it should be, that kind of thing. Another piece in 2007 that makes use of the configuration item infrastructure is software updates. So software updates, ironically, is the piece that is most used in Configuration Manager 2007, because pretty much every organization that has Configuration Manager uses it for software updates. And software updates, very much the same thing. You describe with a configuration item, even though you may not know it's a configuration item, you're describing a configuration that you want to evaluate that needs to be enforced if a patch is applicable, that kind of thing. All of that's done in the configuration item framework, bolted on top of DCM or compliance settings in 2012. Now, and there's other things too, like operating system deployment has drivers, driver packages, that kind of thing. Those are configuration items. Now in 2012, we take the configuration item model and apply it to application deployment. In fact, as we've looked through application deployment, you may have thought, hey, this looks very similar in some ways to software updates. And if you thought that, you're absolutely correct, because some of the things that we can do, the application deployment model, are pieces that we had in various forms in software updates. Okay, one such example is our detection algorithm for the application deployment. If you deploy an application, then you're going to configure detection rules that will allow you to determine if that application is already there. And then when you deploy the application, if it's not there, we're going to go install it. And then at the end of the deployment process, we're going to reevaluate that application to see if it actually installed successfully. The way we reevaluate that application is using the deployment rules. So it's very important to have those deployment rules in place and correct. That's one example. Software updates work the same way, right? So there's very much continuity here across the CI model. So that's we'll spend a lot of time talking about various CIs, trying to show you how the configurations in the console map to some of the CI changes that happen behind the scenes. So that said, let's just jump right into our demo and use that to set the stage for the rest of our discussions. All right, so let's log back into the lab. And to do this, I'm just going to build a very simple deployment or application and deployment type and stop there for now. So to set the stage for this, I'm going to actually stop a few components. All right, let me get rid of that from the screen. So I'm going to stop a few components. So specifically, one component that we are already familiar with from the previous discussion is Distribution Manager. So I'm going to rename Distribution Manager and disable it. Now I'm going to do the same thing for another component, called hierarchy manager. Okay. And then finally, object replication manager. And then with those renamed, I'm going to restart SMS Executive. All right, so again, to give some context while SMS Executive is restarting, this is something I'm doing in my lab. Don't recommend that you do it in production, certainly not on your own, because what I've done by renaming files and restarting the executive is, one, I'm having to restart the executive, which in production you don't want to do just willy-nilly. But two, I'm breaking some components in Configuration Manager just to illustrate a point. All right, so certainly something you don't want to do routinely in production. Sometimes it may be necessary to troubleshoot a problem or whatever, but in general, no. So I've got 3 of them disabled. So with these components disabled, I'm basically short-circuiting the process of the application I'm just about to build, so we can kind of pause in the middle and watch the processing. All right, so let's go back and let's build this application. So for now, I'm just going to build a manual application. Again, this is going to be a do-nothing really application, just to illustrate the point of how things are built. So I'm going through the Create Application Wizard. And I'm just going to create an application called Deep Dive Demo. Not going to supply anything else because I'm not really going to care about deploying this. So as part of this, I'm going to have to add a deployment type. So notice this, I'm going to select a script installer type. Put a middle check mark here because you'll see that again. All right, and move on, and I'm going to give this a deep dive DT for the name. Oops, DT for the name. And then give it a content location. All right, good enough. And browse to my 0-length batch file. Good enough. All right, so, and I'm going to go ahead and just put something here to be able to pass through this wizard. Again, normally you would fill out relevant information here. For now, I'm just trying to pass the wizard and accept the defaults from here and let the wizard do its job of building my application and deployment type. And then we'll go into the, after we're done, we'll go into the logs and see what actually took place. All right. So what I have in the logs as this is finishing up, remember from the previous session, there are the logs, and then there are the logs with additional verbosity, basically the logs on steroids, that you can do by enabling this piece called SQL tracing, where when you run through the logs, the SQL commands that are happening behind the scenes are inserted in the logs. Makes it a very, very noisy log, a very useful log, though, to actually see what's going on behind the scenes. So we're going to do we're going to take a look at the logs without all the SQL tracing noise, because that's what you're going to look at most of the time when you want to take a look at this stuff. But just a reminder that we can actually inject SQL tracing into this as well. All right, so again, when we're looking at logs, the time frame is our friend. So always use the timestamp, try to figure out which logs might have updated recently, that kind of thing. So here, I've sorted by time, and I see one of the first logs that I want to look at is the SMS provider. The reason this is the first one I want to look at is because I've made my configurations in the console. The SMS provider is the piece that interfaces between the console and the database to make those changes show up. All right, so, or to implement those changes. So let's go take a look at this. So with the timestamp being our friend, I'm going to try to go up to the top of my processing loop as close as I can. Oh, we're pretty close here. We'll take a look here. All right, and just start to scroll down. I'm going to slow down a bit here and take a look at some things that happen in a bit more detail in WMI, because this is interesting. So here's one of the first things we'll look at. Okay, so this is a simple select statement. Select star from SMS_application. All right, so this is just retrieving some information from what might appear to be the database. This is actually not a database query. This is a WMI query. In fact, if you look, you see just a few lines below the WQL statement, which is reflected right here, and the translated SQL statement. So there are two statements here, the WMI and SQL statement. All right. So the statement we have highlighted is actually WQL, which means if we look in WMI, we should see a class named SMS_application. Well, let me pause here for a minute and go into WMI and use this as a chance to talk to you about some of the structure of WMI. I'm not going to go into the weeds on this. I'm just going to show you essentially one class, but I want to use it as an illustration of WMI. So on the server side, we certainly have a WMI namespace. We do it as well on the client. On the server side, it's going to be under the generic SMS, and then we're going to have a site underscore and then your site code. Right? So on my CAS, it's going to be site_CAS. So I'm going to connect to that, and then I'm going to enum classes and take a look. Try to go down to this SMS_applications namespace. So under SMS applications, and again, this is just one of many namespaces that are here for various purposes. And so I'm just going to focus on this one, show you very quickly what's in this namespace and describe a couple of things and then move on. And the rest of this you can look at if you like and see other things that are here. So in the SMS application namespace, if I click on instances, then I'll read out a bunch of different things that are here. So the first thing to understand is kind of look at the structure of this, CI_ID. Now you're going to see this whenever you get to the database. So every CI, every configuration item, we haven't seen any configuration items yet, but when we do, every configuration item has a unique identifier to uniquely flag it in the database. So we just actually created an application. When we created that application, the result was that we created some configuration items. So when the console was working, it would go in and insert the configuration item into WMI and ultimately into the database to reflect the configuration we built out in the console. All right? So here is a configuration item number 517. This is the configuration item I just built. I know that just because I know the numbers, and the numbers are consecutive, and this is it. So if I want to see the detail about this configuration item, I can double click on it, select Show MOF, and then here's the information. Notice this unique identifier. So every configuration item has both a unique ID, a unique number, and then a unique ID. This unique ID is what we refer to, and we'll see throughout the discussion. We'll also see the ID number, but the unique ID is a much more meaningful value because it kind of tells us what we're looking at. So notice the name. This is an application CI. You'll see other names in here like global or deployment type or whatever else that kind of describes what you're looking at. But we still don't know what this is. So we keep scrolling down and want to confirm this is the application we just built. And here is the display name of the application. So now we know that we've actually got the application that we built that we're looking at, and here's the metadata, if you will, about it in WMI. All right. So ultimately, through the provider, we want to take the information we put in the console and make it end up in the database. The way we do that is through the provider. So let me geek out for a minute here. One little thing also to notice on this class. Notice that I not only can see and query data, I also have methods where I can interact with data. I can update data. I can get CI information and so on. And this is just one class in WMI. There's a whole bunch of classes in WMI, and each has the opportunity to have methods. Not all of them do. But methods are ways that we can interact with WMI, insert data, update data, that kind of thing. All right. If you look through the SMS prov log, and that's all I'm going to say about WMI right now. If you look through the SMS prov log, you're going to see a lot of select statements, but you're not going to see update statements, insert statements, that kind of thing. Those are handled by methods, like I just showed you. So really what's happening at this stage is we're just selecting information out of WMI. We're basically checking. We saw the new application information come in. So we're basically checking to find out, is this a new application? Is it something that we need to update? What is it, right? So we've queried that, and we roll along. We complete our query and so on. And ultimately, you can scroll through this if you want to see all the detail. There's a lot of good stuff in WMI, but this is where I'm going to kind of break off. So we do our query, we get ready to add our application, and here we see this: put instance async SMS_application. So what this is doing is actually writing information into WMI. We're putting an instance into the SMS application class to describe our configuration item. Okay, so here we're doing put instance. We're updating the content, our SDM content. You'll see SDM here in a minute. We're synchronizing permissions, and then we're adding content 83 to package whatever. All right, and so on. So we're working through basically updating our content using the various methods that are available in WMI. All right, so again, I'll kind of wrap up there, but just wanted to show you a little bit more about WMI information you can see in SMS Prov. You can see a lot of good stuff. All right, so let's turn our attention to the database. So ultimately, the flow of information, again, the admin builds it in the console, builds an application in the console. Through the console, we will talk to the provider in WMI and ultimately write data to the database. Okay, so as we write information to the database, in terms of building applications, packages, whatever, there is a need to take further action on the configurations that we've just implemented into the database. That further action could be deploying the metadata to, or synchronizing the metadata with child sites through SQL replication. Could be that the deployment's created, so we have to tie it to a collection. We'll see that a little bit later. All right. It could be a number of things, but we do need to keep these things in sync. So just like we talked about with packages, there is a component in Configuration Manager that watches the database, watches key database tables, and when things happen that need follow-up action, that component will orchestrate that follow-up action. That component is known as SMS_dbmon, which is right here. Okay, so at this stage, we've created the application. We've not allowed the further processing of the application because we have the 3 threads that are key to it stopped. But that information, when we built the application, has made its way into the database through the provider, through WMI. So since that information got written to the database, and since we have not stopped the SMS_dbmon component, it watched the database, it saw that information get written, and has reacted to it to try to get further action started to orchestrate the processes needed to flow that data down. So we're going to look at the SMS_dbmon log kind of as a shortcut to tell us what to look at in the database. But understand, the information was written to the database first. We're just looking at the dbmon log because we know that it reacted to that information being written to the database. So I hope that makes sense. I'm looking at dbmon before the database, but actually the dbmon log information got written after the database was written to. So if we look at this log, and again look at the timestamp, right? So the timestamp is our friend. Here we're kind of at the top of our loop. We have a little bit of processing going on and maintenance stuff, and then we start to move in. So basically, we're looking and have seen that some action has taken place on a couple of key database tables. This first one, CI_configuration items, and this second one, CI_configuration item relations_flat. These 2 tables are very important tables in the configuration item structure. Okay, and you'll see them in just a minute. In a relational database, it's not uncommon to have a table that exists as a starting point for a certain group of data. And then off of that table, we branch into other tables that might help further describe, further link the data. It's exactly what's happening here. The CI_configuration items table is a key table for storing configuration items as they're generated in the database. So ultimately, whenever we built the application in the console, through WMI, we entered information into the CI underscore configuration items table and the configuration item relations underscore flat table, and that's where we branch off from to look at. You'll also notice a few other things here, talking about the table and then talking about this other thing that ends in IUD, or it could be other extensions at the end. Those are actually called triggers, and they exist on certain tables throughout the database. Triggers basically will react to data that's being deleted from, added to, changed, whatever the trigger definition does. And I'll quickly show you the triggers. I won't go into them, but I'll show you what I'm talking about in terms of triggers. So just from this log alone, we know there are two key tables we need to look at: CI underscore configuration items and CI underscore configuration item relations underscore flat. Now, what are we looking for in those tables? Well, once you become familiar with the logs and the structure and all the information that flows, you're going to recognize that these numbers actually reflect the IDs of the configuration items that were inserted. But if you didn't know that, you can still come down and take a look at some of the activity that took place as a result of information being added to those tables. And actually, here's another couple of tables that are of interest that were impacted. So RBAC underscore change notification is a table that was added to, so that tells us right away that something is happening with role-based security. And then here's another one, the PKG notification, which should be familiar from last time, and we have our package ID. So then once these tables, we recognize the change in them, we start to take action. So we're dropping files. And here are files being added to the obj manager.box, and there are numbers on these. Well, just from what we've talked about already, hopefully this rings a bell that these look very much like CI identification numbers, and in fact they are. So just from this information, we can recognize that the CIs, the configuration items we need to look at, there's one for with a number of 517, one with a 518, one with a 519, and one with a 520. Okay, so we'll look at the grouping of CIs in just a minute. So 517 through 520. But then there's two more things that happen, and we drop a RBC file into HMan box, and then we drop our PKN into distribution manager box. So we'll look at all of these in just a minute. But knowing that we've added some configuration items, let's actually go look at the configuration item tables in the database and see what was added. Okay, so 517 through 520. So let's bring in SQL. And I have a few queries here that I'm going to use to illustrate the point. And I've been messing with this in my lab already, so let me just go ahead and modify this query. Okay, so 517, 518, 519, and 520. So those are the configuration items I want to look at. And so I'm doing a select out of the configuration items table, CI underscore configuration items table, and I want to look specifically where a configuration item ID is one of these four. So I'll do that in just a minute. Before I do that, though, let's go into here and just look at these tables. So look how many configuration item tables there are. All of these are related to defining various types of configuration items. Okay? Not all of them are in play for every single type of configuration item, but a lot of them are, right? So again, going back to the relational database example, there are oftentimes key tables that we will use as a branching off point to store the bulk of our data, but then have other tables that more granularly define certain information and so on. And that's the case here. So one of our key branching off tables is the CI underscore configuration items table. And then we have other tables in here that we will hit, and I will use to describe, some of the other information that's stored here. Again, not trying to be exhaustive on all of the configuration item tables, just trying to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that are done here. So let's run this top level query and figure out what those four configuration items are that were created. So if we execute this, then we see our CIs, all four of them here, and we start to see some interesting information. So let's pull open this column and we'll see this kind of cryptic identifier, unique identifier. So here we can already learn that this CI is an application CI just by the name. We can see this one is a deployment type CI. Then we can see these two are required application or prohibited application CIs. All right, so just at a glance, we can kind of know what we're looking at. We don't know much beyond that, but we at least kind of know what category those configuration items are in. Now, if I want to know the detail behind what this configuration item is trying to do, then I have to look into something called an SDM package. Okay, so here is a digest, meaning a snippet, if you will, of the SDM package. And you certainly have the SDM package defined in more detail here. SDM errors, SDM package, location data, different things, right? But the digest gives us a little bit of information to help us understand what the CI is actually trying to do, what settings or whatever else are in that CI, what the action is going to be. So let me pause here for a minute. So certainly we talk in terms of CIs, and we've already talked about what CIs are. So CIs work with and pair with SDM packages, SDM service definition model. There's a specific structure to all this that works together to help implement a configuration item that is described by a CI. The SDM package helps describe how that's implemented, so on. Okay. So if I want to see, oh, and by the way, before I jump into that, so there are also multiple types of CIs that are system CIs. You'll see some of those coming up shortly, where this is a framework. This CI SDM package structure is a framework that helps the client know how to implement various settings. Some of those settings will be defined by the user, like we just did with the application. Some of them will be system-defined settings that help describe how to handle certain types of settings, and we'll see some of those in a minute. But if I want to look specifically at the CI and see what kind of information it has and what it's going to do, then I can actually look at the SDM package digest. And I can't tell a whole lot here. I won't go into the weeds on this, but I can definitely tell that this SDM package describes my application deep dive demo that I created. So right there, I can tie the two together. And so knowing that this is a deployment type, what I would expect to see here are details about how that deployment should be carried out. In fact, so here I see it's going to execute in the user context. It's going to use installer technology. It's going to be a script. It is going to require logon, yes. Okay, here's the source directory. It does enable peer caching, and you get the idea. So here's my rules, okay, that I put in for detection logic and so on, and more stuff that I can just scroll down and see. Okay, just right here in the digest. So a lot of good information here. And then there's the other two types that describe a required application, a prohibited application, and so on. Other information that I see here right away is this model information. So I can see my configuration item, and I can also see the models that the configuration item needs just by reference. So if I look over to the left, I can actually see a table called CI models, which might make me wonder, hey, is there something in there that I might want to look at? So let's just take a look. Here's 289, 90, 91, 92. So what do those models actually relate to? So let's query that table. Okay, 289, 90, 91, 92. So we'll execute that and then scroll down all the way to the bottom. There we go. 289, 90, 91, 92. So this is just, again, nothing too exciting, but just in curiosity, we can go over here and look at it. It kind of reflects the same kind of information, the model that we're going to use and so on. So nothing to dig into really there, but just ties together how the relationships between these tables can be meaningful. And you'll see some interesting stuff in just a minute that kind of illustrates that concept. Okay, so other information. So notice the CI version. So we track the version of our CIs, and specifically in the application world, we use those for revision history. So you notice over here in the console, if I go back to my application, then I have the ability to look at revision history. It's not meaningful now because there's nothing here. There's no revision history. I just have the one version of this, version number 1. But we'll see that change as we move along. All right, other things that are interesting. We can see the CI type. So I've already mentioned the various types of CIs, and there are a bunch of them. So if I'm curious what the types are, here's some numerical representations, and lo and behold, I have a CI types table. So let's go see what kind of types of CIs I actually have here. So here I have a 10, a 20, a 21, and a 24. So if I look, a CI type of 10 is an app model CI. I just built an application, so it makes sense. If I look at 21, I have a deployment type. I just built a deployment type, makes sense. 24, an install policy type. Those, the application and deployment type that I just built needs to be installed. I defined that, so here we have it, makes sense. Other things in here, so you see baseline, operating system, business policy, software updates, all those things that I described. So DCM or compliance settings would be these. Drivers for OSD, and so on. So a whole bunch of interesting information. So if I scroll down, I can even see more deployment types. All right. Again, not to get too off in the weeds on the CI model in general, and just sticking with the application information. And again, not even covering that exhaustively. So policy version. Oh, one thing before I forget, because I think I might. I mentioned the trigger, and triggers are underneath each table, and not every table has them. But this is the trigger, and here's the one that was referenced in the log. Right? So you can certainly right-click on a trigger and modify it, view it, whatever. Won't do that here, but just to make sure we're having continuity with what we saw in the logs. All right, date modified, who the last person that modified was. All this information, some of the key flags, whether it's a user-defined CI, whether it's currently enabled, whether it's the latest CI, all of those kind of things. All right, so we'll see some changes here in just a minute. So other information that's here. So I know that these are my CIs. Well, I also noticed in the log that there was this other table called CI configuration item relations _ flat. So I'm wondering maybe what's in that table. So let's take our CIs and go query that table, since we know that it was imported in the log. All right, and see what's there. So just by the name, you can get an idea that this table is describing some of the relationships that are necessary for the configurations that I've just introduced, and that's absolutely true. So here I have a unique relationship ID, but then I have my unique configuration item ID that's listed in the from CI ID to CI ID. So the from is mine, the CIs that I just created. The to defines a relationship that my CI has to have with other CIs in the database. All right, and we'll see those relationships a little bit more, and they'll become maybe more meaningful to you as we go along. But essentially, what we start to see is that these CIs are all tied together. Right? There are dependencies, even internally, even if you don't define them. There are dependencies that these CIs have with one another. All right, so let's take a look. For example, here's a 2 CI, so I see some things that I've not seen yet in terms of CI numbers. I see a 19, a 74, an 84, and I actually see those numbers repeated. Okay? I see a 518 kind of joining to itself. Okay, I see 517 and 518 joined together. Okay, so here, this is your application, so I'm just defining my application. There's kind of a self-reference here. Then I have my deployment type. I just remember this from the numbers I had. I believe this is a deployment type. Anyway, so here's I believe that's the deployment type referring to the key application. Either way, we can look at it and verify it. So let's do that. So for this given CI 518, let's look at all the dependencies. So here I have the dependencies listed out, and actually done a little bit of work here already, so let me straighten this up. So we're going to look at the 2 CIs, CI ID column, and 518 is certainly one of them. So let's see what we have. Oops, didn't mean to do that, sorry. Undo. There we go. So execute. So here we can see right away that I have my deployment type is the 518 that I'm referencing. Okay, so 518 is kind of referring to itself. And then the other tie-ins are, for example, script deployment technology. Now you see global. So global should be a flag that says this is something that's kind of a system-defined value. And I mentioned when I was going through the definition of the application, specifically the deployment type, from the drop-down I said I was going to create a deployment type that was deploying a script native technology. That's what you see here. So there is a configuration item that specifically defines how to do that. And so that's why we see this surfacing here. Now, there are other configuration items that describe a number of other deployment types. So let's just show that for a minute and see what we have. See if I can take a stab at it. Mouse isn't working with me. Hang on. There we go. So let's see if I can just do that's 84. So let's see if I can just do or CI ID greater than 80 and CI ID less than 90 and just see what I get from that. All right. So here, yeah, you'll see here's an MSI deployment type, a Nokia deployment type, Windows Mobile Installer deployment type, @v deployment type. So you get the idea. These are all system-defined deployment mechanisms that we can tap into. All right. Cool. So let's go back up to, well, let me remove these changes real quick. Looks like I overwrote what I didn't mean to overwrite, so stand by. Okay, good enough. So pause the video real quick while I quickly put all that back in place instead of making you look at it. So here we go. Let's go back to our table. So you see, basically that's it. We have these four. We have our model IDs. We have our CI version, and so on. Oops, I realized what I did now. Hang on, let me go back up here. This is what I want. This table. All right. So other things that are here. So we have the referenced CI to CI. Then we have this thing called a relationship type. All right. So we see several relationship types defined here. We see some of 0, meaning no relationship defined here. We have a 16. We have a 7. We have an 11 numerically. We have a 9, I think, down here somewhere, or we will as we go along. We don't have it. Yeah, there's a 9 right here. Okay. So let's see what those are. We actually have a table called CI relation types. So let's go query on it and see what these are. So the relationship type of 0, there is nothing defined for it. Okay. But we do have a 7. So it's a self relationship, a relationship to itself. Okay, we have a 9, which is a app to deployment type reference. So basically we're tying an application to the various deployment types that are defined for the application. Then we have a 16, which is the application type itself. Then we have an 11. So is an intention CI. Or relationship. And some of these will become more clear to you once we get to the client side. You'll certainly see intention evaluation happening on the client. All right, but again, it gives you a pretty clear picture, hopefully, of what's actually going on with these configuration items, how they are all interwoven, how they relate to each other, why some of those relationships take place, and so on. All right. All right, good enough. So not to belabor that point, but just wanted to walk through that and show you what we have. So that said, let's actually go and allow some of this processing to take place, and we'll see some more of this stuff here in just a minute. So right now, again, as a reminder, all that's happened is we've gone through and built an application, and we've allowed that application to be processed by the provider, and through the provider, we've actually inserted that data into the database, and now we are ready to act on that data with the various components that we stopped. So let's go start those components one at a time and see what's going on. So the first one we'll start with is Hierarchy Manager. So I'll rename hman. All right, and let me stop the executive. Well, as soon as the keyboard responds to me. So I'll actually go ahead and stop the executive. There we go. It just came back alive. All right, so let me stop the executive now and go ahead and navigate over in the logs to the hman log. So open that up. And then once hman starts up, we'll see it start to process and see it pick up some information. Oh, also let me show you the inbox. So here's Distribution Manager. You see some stuff queued up there already. Here's hman. So we have a couple of key flag files based on the processing we did that hman is going to have to process. So let's start up executive. There, start executive. All right, so as soon as we do, we should see pretty quickly here the hman log start to run. And we're looking for just one key piece of information. So once those files disappear, then we'll know that we're ready to take a look at the log. Should be just a second. All right, there goes one of them. Okay, so I'll go ahead and pause the log at this stage. So basically just want to show you here, Hierarchy Manager sees that it needs to start. It sees some incoming files, right? It sees that we need to handle some RBAC permissions lookup, trying to sync that down, okay, and so on. Let me just free that up, make sure that we got everything done. Yep, okay, handle RBAC permissions. We are synchronizing it, so that file that came in, we synchronized it successfully, and we're syncing down the permissions. Okay, nothing huge and earth-shattering here. Hierarchy Manager manages the hierarchy, thus the name. One of the things we can do in Configuration Manager 2012 is role-based access control. So RBAC security, that is a piece that's managed by Hierarchy Manager whenever we have new pieces that are introduced that could possibly have RBAC as part of it. Hierarchy Manager will kick in and deal with it, and that's what you see. Okay. So another thread that we stopped is OBJ Replication Manager. So let's rename it and go through the same process. Let's stop the executive, and while that's stopping, we'll navigate over to OBJ Replication Manager and see what's in here. We have 4 files, the different CI numbers that we've already seen. And let's go in the logs and open up OBJ Replication Manager log. Let's do this alphabetically. There we go. Here's the log, so let's restart executive. All right, so while that starts up, we'll look to see it kick in. We'll see it process some of these files in just a second, and we'll actually see what it does. So we just saw it wake up. Okay, and we're going to start to process. Once we start to see these files disappear, we'll know that it's underway. All right, and looks like we just got our first one, so we're processing our app model, begin processing the CIN flag, process the app model, delete the notification file because we're processing the app model file now, and then we should be done in a second. We'll pick up and move on. So yeah, we processed it. The CI affected was 517. Right now the CI is not targeted because we haven't deployed it. Successfully processed. Now we're processing the next one. Again, it's not targeted, so on we go and processing forward. Okay, so processing by OBJ Replication Manager has a number of different things that it will do. Certainly keeping things in sync, certainly notifying other components of work to be done, and you'll see the notification of other components of work to be done here in a minute whenever we actually do the deployment. All right, so now those are processed. So good to go. Now, the last component is Distribution Manager. So nothing new really here. Oops. Because we saw this last time. But Distribution Manager does still have a role, for sure. Adding the information. So you'll see whenever we get into the Distribution Manager log, it's going to add some things to the, it won't say it, but it'll say add it to the packages table, the program tables, and so on, with the package ID reference. And so it links in, continuity there. It has some distribution point plays and package server plays and some other things that can happen. All right, so we're starting that back up. Good enough. So let's go watch Distribution Manager and see what it does. So we actually didn't get to the inbox in time. Distribution Manager, it probably has processed already. Let's see. Nope, there they are. All right, good. So let's close the log here and go to Distribution Manager. So the file is just processed. So let's watch what it did. So it found our notification files, and it's in the process of processing now. So let's just watch one of them here. So start the processing thread, start the DP Manager thread, starting the content cleanup thread, whatever. Started the package evaluation thread, the looking at the content, and so on. Here we see the content ID flag that we're working on. Okay, so this is actually the name of the content. In fact, if you cross-reference that to the console, you'll see in our deployment type the content ID reflected, so you can tie it back. There we go, content D9 C0. So if we go back to the logs, we'll see D9 C0. Let's see. I think, where's Distribution Manager? D9, let's look for it. Well, hang on. There it is. It took me a second to find it, but right here, adding contents, content underscore D9C, whatever. So you can see that cross-linked to the console, updating the package on the server and different things. So not a ton here, but there is some stuff working behind the scenes to update the different Distribution Manager tables, SMS packages, and so on. All right. So that said, we are allowing things to process, things are rolling through, and we are now good to go. Things are replicating down to the child site and so on, so we should be good to go. So now, there's some other interesting things that we could do here. So what I want to do is go back through the package, or the application, and add a dependency and see what happens. Then I want to go add a requirement and see what happens. And then finally add a supercedence and see what happens. So let's do that. So the first thing I want to do is add a dependency. So I'll go to the Deployment Type tab, go to Properties, and just add a simple dependency. Again, doesn't really matter what it is. I just want to go through the motions on the back end and see. I noticed I misspelled deep dive DP. So as soon as Properties comes up in Dependencies, we'll just select something here. Okay, add. All right, so let's just pick this one. Good enough. Okay. Then okay again. And okay again. All right. So now that triggered some motion in the back end. Again, I have nothing disabled here, so it should just move right on through. No problem. So the log that I want to look at really the key one is the SMSDBmon log. So let me go in there again. And here, I just really want to see the changes that are happening in terms of what CIs are actually being written now. What changes have been made in the database as a result. So if we just if we scan through here, it'll take a second, and we'll be done here. Yeah, give it a couple of seconds. There we go. All right, so a few CIs have been added here. So here we have 522, we have 519, 524 looks like, and so on. So a few more past where we were. Here's 521, 522. So let's go factor those in. Looks like about 4 more were added. So let's just factor them in. 521, 522, 523, 524, and let's see, was that it? Any more? So 22, let's go to the top just to make sure we don't miss any. 24, I think, is our highest number. Just scanning through. Yeah, it looks like 24. All right, so let's run this. And what we're going to notice, I'll show you what we're going to notice here. It looks like I put it in the wrong area here. Let me move that up. There we go. Let me run it up here. All right, so if we look at the CIs again, notice that basically we have 4 new CIs created. If we look at these, the name is exactly what we had before, right down to the identification number and so on. So really what these are is a recreation of the existing application CI, the existing deployment type CI, and so on. It's just now we have a new version. Okay? So if we go back to the revision history tab now on this particular application, and look now, we have the previous one still available. It's there. Thus, that's why we created the new versions of the CI. So we have the original version 1 we can go back to, but it's no longer the active one. So if we look in the database, we can tell it's no longer the active one if we scroll to the right. Right over here, we see is expired with the value of 1, meaning true. So version 1 is now expired. Version 2 is now the active one. All right, so that's how it all kind of lines up. Okay, so let's keep following this down. So the next thing that I want to look at is the configuration item relations table. All right, since I know that these 4 new ones are basically a rehash of what I already had, then I'll just look at these 4 new ones instead of all of the ones that we had before. Kind of keep the screen a bit clearer. So let's go replace these. Oops. And run this query. All right, so what we're looking for specifically here is to see any changes that showed up as a result of adding the dependency. And if we look down, everything looks pretty similar. We have a 19, we have a 74, we have an 84, and 522. Pretty much all the numbers line up until we get down here. So here on CI 521, we actually have added a relationship to CI 252. So then the question is, what is CI 252? Well, let's go see. All right, so let me copy this line. Actually, let me just tag it in here. So 252. So if I look at that, all right, so it looks like I have another deployment type CI. Okay, and what is that deployment type? So if I look at it, we see here this is in fact the dependency that I just added. So just quickly about looking at the relationship table, we can see that now the CI that we have just added, the change that we just made, resulted in not a new CI being made, certainly a new version, but a new dependency. Actually, I did the wrong one. This one, a new dependency being put in place between the application I created and the one that the deployment type that I created for my application and the one that I referred to in the dependency. All right, so So pretty cool stuff. Now, if I go back to the application and add now a requirement, so back on the deployment type, I'll just add a requirement. As soon as it comes up. All right, good enough. So again, doesn't really matter what it is, just to put the system through the motions. So I'll just use one of the custom ones I already have created. Good enough. Oops, we need to add a value. All right. Okay. All right, so while that's saving, so we can go back and look at the SMSDB log. We really won't see anything different. We're just going to see another set of CIs created. Again, the new set of CIs will become version 3, and version 1 and 2 then will be in history, and we'll be able to look at those if we wanted to in the revision history tab. So that's saving along. So now I'll just go ahead and go proactively adjust my query, and we'll see the next 4 in line. All right, good enough, and I'll just go ahead and adjust this one while I'm here. Okay, cool. So let's run this top query, and now we see just like mentioned. Oops, didn't run. Doesn't look like. Yeah, it's running now. Okay, so we did get them entered. So let's see. It returned back. So now we have. Oh, looks like we ran more than one. Sorry. Let me just run this one, top one. Okay, so we have version 1, version 2, version 3. Okay, so if we look at the CI relations table, we'll see another relationship has now been added. So scanning down the numbers, we're looking for, again, something that's changed. So looking down, everything looks pretty consistent. Whoops, here we go, right off the bat. Here's a relationship type of 13, okay, and a CI of 158. So I can tell by the new CI that I've got something going on, so I can just add in 158 to the mix and see what that is. And 158 is going to be, again, it's a global condition CI. All right, so you can, again, by the name, you can pretty much pick up on what a given configuration item is going to describe. And here I see, again, the robocopy rule that I went ahead and put in place, requirement that I went ahead and put in place. Now, if I go back to the first or the previous query and look again, I see a relationship type of 13. I don't think I showed you the relationship type of 10. Maybe I did, but either way, I'll rerun the relationship type query, and we'll see a relationship type of 10. Again, is an app dependence, so that was our dependency relationship, and 13 is a global condition reference. So just exactly what I did in the console, adding the dependency, adding the global condition reference. Now everything's good to go. All right, so last one, back in the console, let's go into properties of the application. And on the application itself now, I'm going to add a supercedence relationship. So quickly over here, add in the supercedence. Again, doesn't matter what I'm going to pick. All right, good enough. Okay. Again, that doesn't matter. Hit OK. So we're saving that off. So as before, we'll be able to see the new CIs that are there. In fact, I won't belabor the point by adding more. I'll just change these to reflect the new numbers that will show up. And by the way, I'm doing these consecutively because I'm in my lab and I know that these will be the next consecutive numbers. In production, you won't know that. You'd have to actually verify it in the log each time. But for me, since I'm the only one working here, I know these are the next 4. So I can go ahead and run this and see, in fact, what new thing has shown up here for the relationship. Oops. And now I'm looking for a relationship type of 15. So if I scan down, I should see a relationship type of 15 show up. Let's see. Actually, it may not have done it yet. Let me see if it changes. And let me verify in the log it actually happened already. Looks like it did. And my CI numbers. So 30, 29, 30, 31, are those the ones that I have? Nope, doesn't look I have them all. So let's see. So this one actually caught me off guard. So 29, 30, 26, 29, 30, 25. Okay, so let's cover all the bases. 25 through 31 through 32. All right, let's make sure. 25 through 32. This should cover all of them. So let's rerun the query. All right, so here's a 9. That's one of the ones that I'm looking for. Let's see if I have anything else show up, like a 15 or anything. Yeah, here's my 15. All right, so definitely these CIs, I can track them back and map them to the deployment types and all of, or the actual GUID and so on if I wanted to. I call it a GUID, looks like one, but the identifier, CI identifier. So 15 and 9 show up. So let's go see what those relationship types are first of all. So 9, again, is an app to deployment type reference. So I built one of those. Whenever I build my supercedence, that makes sense. I'm going to have another deployment type I'm referencing. And then 15 is application superseded. All right. So back up here one last time, run this again. And the other thing I see now is that I'm going to have a dependency on another CI. So ones I've already had, 252, 158. So what do we have in addition to that? 158. 531. 470 right in front of me. I just didn't see it at first. So let's go back up here and we'll add in 470 and rerun this, and we'll see in fact that the supercedence is the application deployment type that I specified. Okay, so there it is. Look at the actual SDM and you'll see that it is the distribute on demand source and so on. So that's basically what I wanted to show you about building an application, how the CIs work. Again, haven't gone exhaustively through the CIs, but it gives you hopefully a flavor of how this stuff works together. Now, remember where we are. Where we are, we haven't deployed anything, right? All we've done is we've built the application, we've built the deployment type, we've tweaked it a couple of times to add a few things to it, but we haven't actually deployed it yet. So we're going to go do that real quick, and to get ready for that, I need to go over to the client side and stop a couple of components. So I'm going to go to my primary site. I say client side, to my primary site, and stop a couple of components that will be key to processing. So let's rename Object Replication Manager to DL underscore, and rename Policy Provider to DL underscore, and restart the executive. So again, the ultimate end of what we're doing is to get the application deployed to clients and get policy prepared for clients so that they know what to do when they check in at the next policy polling cycle. So we're going to break in our discussion once we get policy prepared, and then continue on the client side after that's done. So now this is all ready to go, should be stopped, and we can go ahead and deploy our application. So back in the console, I'm going to go and deploy. Okay, and again, doesn't really matter what I choose. Just want to work through the pieces here. So I'll choose a collection. I'll just use all users. Okay, hit OK. And remember, by the way, that I used all users. You'll see it again here in a second. So I'll add a distribution point for the content, which I have to do. Okay, again, I'm going to talk about distribution points in the next session, but for now we'll add it because we have to. It's just going to be an available deployment, and off we go, and the deployment should be created. And in a bit, we'll have some information that flows down to the primary site. So remember, the CAS we can do all our work on to actually build the application, do the deployments associated with collections, but there are no clients that live on the primary site. So there's no real work that needs to be done on the primary site in terms of building mappings and so on for deploying the content to clients. There are no clients on the site. So we need to get the policy prepared over on the primary site because that's where we have our clients. So if we go now over to the primary site, we should have data showing up very soon over in OBJ Replication Manager. Okay. So before we get there, though, actually let's take a look there real quick, see when the files start to show up. Okay, so not here yet, but they'll be here in just a minute. Okay, so before we get into that, let's take a look. There they are, in fact. Let's take a look at the database again. So now we're still in the CI tables, but we're going to be looking at the CIs in terms of mapping to a collection. So very much like we had on the package side where we did, you looked at a component called Offer Manager to take the advertisement or the deployment for the package and program and map it to a collection. Now OBJ Replication Manager is going to do that same job. And we've already actually got information prepared and ready for OBJ Replication Manager because we've replicated that data down to the site. So now we're going to look at the CI assignments. Okay, so we've created our deployment. So let's just go requery this table. I've already got it up here. So let's take a look. Okay, so CI assignments table, if we run the query and then scroll to the bottom, we're going to have an entry 49. So this is our assignment ID, a unique assignment GUID, and notice the name, Deep Dive Demo All Users Install. So this is definitely the deployment we just created. So it's created, it's actually mapped over to collection ID 3, okay, target collection ID. So just in this one view, I can see the assignment. I can see what assignment we have here. So we have our assignment ID, we have our assignment unique ID, we have our assignment name, and we have what collection that assignment is mapped to. Okay, and we can scroll on over and see some more information about it, assignment action, and different other information. Okay, so to know what actually is in the assignment, we have to go figure out, based on the assignment ID, what's going on. So if I look at assignment targeted CIs, okay, so let's go over to assignment targeted CIs up here. CI assignment targeted CIs right there. I was looking right past it. Okay, so we're going to look for 7DC7 as a assignment ID. So select top 1000 row. Okay, so assignment ID, oops, looks like we need the other one. 49, I believe it was. 49, yes. So 49, okay. So here, we're basically taking the CI of 529, and it is being assigned to the collection, right? So the CI assignment table is where we actually see the mapping between the assignment and the collections it's going to go to. But here we see the actual CI that's being assigned based on association with the assignment ID. So now we've done the work and we have linked up our deployment with the collection that we care about. And by the way, before I leave here, I know collection 3 is all users. I can just as easily come in and query that. So new query. All right, oops. Select star from V underscore, oops, helps from on the right database, doesn't it? Run it again. What do I have? Okay, so all users is SMS0002. The ID of 3 is actually in the table here. So collections. Okay, so here's the collection ID. So SMS002 is a collection ID of 3. It's all users. So basically, again, with collections, you can map everything together and see how things translate through. Okay. All right, good enough. So we've actually got it processed. Everything's ready for OBJ Replication Manager to implement. So let's go over and look at that folder. Here are the flag files, 0 length. So let me start that component up first. So I'll come in here and rename that. And rename it to DLL. Restart executive. And by the way, while this is flipping, apologize for the starts and stops here. A couple of places where it took me a second to find what I was looking for. This is definitely not the easiest stuff to demo, so appreciate your patience with that. So we'll start the executive back up and watch for these files to disappear. In fact, let me go ahead and pull up the logs while this is working. So we're looking for the OBJ REPL Manager log, or OBJ Manager log. All right, logs, there we are. And this is the one. So we should see it spinning up here. In fact, those objects are already processed. And we're looking for a couple of key things. Basically, we're seeing, look, it's processing the CIs. I'll just pause the log right here. Beginning collection targeting information for affected CIs. So we noticed that we did have a policy coming in. We noticed that it was assigned. Now we're reviewing the different CIs that were in play. These are the different versions of the CI. Okay, so you notice that they're 4 numbers apart in increment. So this is the 4th one, version 4, that we created. It is targeted. So we're going to evaluate that one and set it up for our clients. We're going to set it up for our clients by creating policy. The way we're going to do that is we're going to create a file trigger for policy. This shows the OBJ Manager box. Basically, it's taking these files, using these to create a trigger. It successfully processed the information, and if we roll on a little bit longer, a little bit further down, we'll see that we deleted the notification and policy ID was created, policy version, and so on. So we see that it actually created policy. But again, if you look at this, you would think that this thread itself created the policy. That's not what did it. We actually have the policy provider thread that we can look at. So if we look at the policy provider inbox, which is currently disabled, we can see a couple of flag files waiting there to carry out work. Here they are. All right, so if I go and re-enable that, all right, and restart the executive again, And this will be our last stop. Once we get done with this, once policy provider wakes up and processes these files, then policy will truly be created for the client. And that's where we stop. The next time the client comes in, asks for policy, it will see that it has an update based on the work taking place here, and we'll learn about the application and work to do. So that's starting back up, and let's just watch here. We'll go ahead and open proactively the policy provider log. Again, what we want to see in the policy provider log is that it actually created policy. Here we are. So open that up. Should see it spin through here in a sec. All right, so it looks like the files are about to process. Here we go. So they're still starting up, evaluating collection 3 right there. All right, so we're actually seeing that we have some policy changes, building collection changes, and so on, updating our policy map, rolling on even further, and eventually we'll delete these files. Okay. Oh, and by the way, look in this. These files actually change, so this is not the file that was there to start with, but you'll see that they change as we roll along. This one actually has data in it. So if you catch it in time, which I may not have, let's see if we can open it. Yeah, so I didn't. Doesn't look like I caught it in time. Maybe I did, but it has 1K in length. Still nothing visible inside Notepad, so I just wanted to check that. I hadn't caught that before. And we see that we evaluated, we see that we ran through, and that's it, right? Policies created for our collection, and now we're done. So that takes us through the server side. And again, not exhaustively, certainly spent a little bit of time, saw the major components of things that I added, but there's a lot more to it, as you can gather just by looking at the list of tables. But that'll be where we stop for now, and we'll pick up on the next session and talk about the internals in a similar fashion with distribution points. We'll certainly look at a few tables in the database and other things, so we will talk to you then.